Hello again. Let me begin by asking you this particular question. What role do you think decomposers play in the ecosystem? What role do you think decomposers play in the ecosystem? Now, what are actually decomposers? Decomposers are living organisms that break down organic matters, into simpler substances. Now, they cause what we call decay or rottenness. Now, does decay of plants and animals, does it have any importance or any role it plays in the ecosystem? I believe you might have seen dead remains of animals on the streets and even on the soil or in the farmland. Now, does these decayed dead or these dead and decayed animals and plants, do they have any role they play in the ecosystem? Are there importance of these happenings in our ecosystem? Like I have explained to you, we have several types of decomposers. Bacteria is a decomposer. Fungi is also a decomposer. But please take note, decomposition or decomposers, they play a very big, important role in the functioning of our ecosystem. They do. And in our discussion in this particular topic, we're going to see a whole lot of importance or roles these decomposers play in order for our ecosystem to be functioning. I can give you particularly one. One of the importance these decomposers play in terms of contributing to the functioning of the ecosystem is to also replenish soil nutrients. Replenish soil nutrients. Remember, plants depend on soil nutrients for food. In fact, they depend on soil nutrients for healthy growth as well as development. The productivity and the yield of plants is also based on the nutrients they can absorb from the soil. And these nutrients are produced by decomposers or by the actions of these decomposers. So decomposers, they play a whole lot of role. In fact, they play an important role in the functioning of the ecosystem. And this topic, nutrient cycling 2, we're going to be looking at a lot of things about decomposers. We're going to be talking about nitrogen cycle. And in this nitrogen cycle, we're going to see how decomposers, mostly bacteria, they play a major role in recycling or in the nutrient cycle. They play a major role. We're going to be seeing how they play a major role in nutrient cycle. We're also going to be looking at decomposers, the different types of decomposers. We're going to be looking at the process of decomposition. And then finally, we're also going to be looking at the roles of decomposers in the ecosystem. We're going to answer this question in broad details. Much explanations will be given as regards this particular question. Now, if you're set, let's go into what we have now. Now, the topic, like I said, is nutrient cycling 2. And in this particular topic, we are going to be looking at a whole lot of things. We're going to start by looking at the objective. What are the objectives? What specific objective we need to discover or get by the end of this class or this topic? Number one is that we should be able at the end of this topic to describe the process of nitrogen cycle. Number two, you should be able to mention the types of decomposers. Number three, you should also be able to describe the process of decomposition in nature. And then number four, you should be able to mention the roles of decomposers in an ecosystem. Roles of decomposers in an ecosystem. Now, in nutrient cycling 1, we made mention of what nutrient cycling is by definition. We said that nutrient cycling is the continuous circulation of nutrients in nature. And I told you these nutrients can also be called elements, and they include elements or nutrients like we have oxygen, we have phosphorus, we have sulfur, we have carbon, we have nitrogen, we have water, and so on. These are nutrients, okay? Now, these nutrients, the continuous circulation of these nutrients in nature is what we call nutrient cycle. In our previous class, we have talked about water cycle. We've looked at the process that is involved during water cycle, and also we have looked at the importance of water to living organisms. We have also discussed oxygen cycle, and we've looked at the process of oxygen cycle. We've also looked at the importance of oxygen to living organisms, and also we have talked about carbon cycle at length, the processes, and as well as the importance of carbon or carbon dioxide to living organisms. And then also we discussed at length to look at the importance of or the need for a carbon oxygen balance to be maintained. The need for a carbon oxygen balance to be maintained. Now, remember, there was something we said in our previous class about nutrient cycle. I told you it occurs in two main processes, in two main stages, if I may put it that way, or phases. Now, the first one has to do with nutrients moving from the earth to the atmosphere, and the second stage has to do with nutrients from the atmosphere returning back to the earth. In the same manner, in this type of nutrient cycle, which is called nitrogen cycle, so we're looking at just 4 different types of nutrient cycle. We've talked about water cycle, we've talked about carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, and this is the last carbon nutrient cycle we're going to be looking at in this topic, and that is nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle. Now, what is nitrogen cycle? Nitrogen cycle is actually the continuous circulation, the continuous circulation of nitrogen in nature. Continuous circulation of nitrogen in nature. We can also define nitrogen cycle as the continuous addition and removal of nitrogen from the soil. Nice one. The continuous addition and removal of nitrogen from the soil. Now, this particular definition explains the processes involved during nitrogen cycle. So it simply means, based from the definition, we can say nitrogen cycle occur in 2 different stages. One has to do with the addition of nitrogen to the soil from the atmosphere, that is, from the atmosphere to the soil, addition of nitrogen from the atmosphere to the soil. And the second one is the removal of nitrogen from the soil, addition of nitrogen to the soil, removal of nitrogen from the soil. So these are the 2 main processes or stages, or you can call them phases, of nitrogen cycle. Now, let's take a look at some of these phases or these stages. The first one is nitrogen is added to the soil. Now, what are the processes involved as nitrogen is added to the soil? Number 1, we have what we call nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation. And we're going to be explaining more about nitrogen fixation. Number 2 process that brings about the addition of nitrogen to the soil is thunderstorms and lightning. Number 3 is ammonification and nitrification. Number 4 is decay of organic matter. Number 5 is application of artificial fertilizers. Number 6 is application of farmyard manure or compost manure or poultry droppings, animal dungs, or green manure. The application of farmyard manure or compost manure brings about the addition of nitrogen to the soil. Now, let's take a look at each of these processes and how is nitrogen added to the soil through these processes. The first one we're going to be looking at is nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation. Now, nitrogen is actually a component of air, component of the atmosphere, and it has about 78%, in fact, it's about 78% composition in the atmosphere. Animals don't actually make use of it. Mostly higher animals, they don't make use of nitrogen, and that is why during inhalation we inhale 78% of nitrogen, and when we exhale air we also exhale 78% of nitrogen. But that is not the same case in terms of plants. Now, if you look at the topic called mineral requirements of plants, nitrogen is one of the major nutrients. They are major nutrients. You can also call them essential nutrients or essential elements. They are required in large quantities. In fact, they are required in large quantities for plant growth and healthy development. Very important to plants, but not to animals. Most animals, not to most animals, but to plants. Now, how is nitrogen fixation carried out, or what is actually nitrogen fixation? Remember, we said it's one of the processes, one of the most important processes through which nitrogen is added to the soil. Now, nitrogen fixation is actually the process by which reasonable amount of nitrogen. The reason why we are calling it reasonable is because we said nitrogen is required in large quantities. So reasonable amount of nitrogen is added to the soil by some soil organisms. I said it is the process by which reasonable amount of nitrogen is added to the soil by some soil organisms. Now, we have about two main types of nitrogen fixation. Two types of nitrogen fixation. One of them is called the symbiotic nitrogen fixation, and the other one is called the non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation. Now, in subsequent classes, we will be looking at what we call symbiotic or symbiosis. Now, okay, let me give you a little hint. Symbiosis has to do with a mutual relationship where two organisms are involved. One benefits from the other. In fact, both organisms benefit from the other. Okay, this one benefits from this, the other benefits from the other person. It's a type of biological relationship or association between most organisms. Almost all organisms have biological association. Now, symbiotic nitrogen fixation is also a type of biological association, and that type of biological association is called symbiosis. Symbiosis. Now, I told you of some organisms that are found. I said in the definition of nitrogen fixation, there are some organisms, soil organisms, or organisms that are found in the soil that brings about the addition of reasonable amounts of nitrogen to the soil. Now, one of them is the Rhizobium leguminosaureum. Rhizobium leguminosaureum. Now, Rhizobium leguminosaureum is mostly located or found to live in the root nodules of leguminous plants. They find themselves there at the root nodules of leguminous plants. Now, these rhizobium have the ability to trap atmospheric nitrogen, and then fix them directly into the plants. They fix it directly into the plants. Remember, I said that this type of nitrogen fixation is called symbiotic. It means that both the plant, leguminous plant, and the bacteria, they benefit from each other. Now, how do they actually benefit from each other? Now, the plant supplies carbohydrates for use. That is, they use the nitrogen. They also use them for manufacturing of food and every other thing. And they produce carbohydrate with it. Now, when they produce carbohydrates, these bacteria to make use of the carbohydrate that is being produced by the plants during photosynthesis. Remember, I said that the nitrogen is actually used by these plants for healthy growth and development. As they grow, they develop, they are able to manufacture food through the process of photosynthesis. Now, the nitrogen that is being supplied by these bacteria is used by plants for healthy growth and development, and then the food the food produced by the plants during photosynthesis is then used by the bacteria. Okay, so this is what we call symbiotic nitrogen fixation between the Rhizobium leguminosaureum and leguminous plants. The second type of nitrogen fixation is what we call the non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation. Non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation. Now, this one occurs in bacteria, but the bacteria this time that is involved in non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation is the Azotobacter as well as the Clostridium. Clostridium and Azotobacter, they also live freely in the soil. They are found to live freely in the soil. And they can also fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, and they do this aerobically or anaerobically. So they fix nitrogen into the soil. And plants that are found around that area benefit from this nitrogen being dissolved in water, and then they absorb it through their root hairs into the plant and then make use of this nitrogen in whichever way best that is required for the plant's growth and development. But please note that Azotobacter and Clostridium operates in a non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation. They are examples of soil organisms that undergoes non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation, while Rhizobium leguminosaureum undergoes symbiotic nitrogen fixation. So nitrogen fixation is also one of the ways through which reasonable amount of nitrogen is added to the atmosphere. Number 2 is thunderstorm. Thunderstorm is also another process through which nitrogen is added to the atmosphere. Now, during thunderstorms and lightning, nitrogen combines with oxygen to form what we call nitrogen 2 oxide or nitrogen monoxide or nitrogen 2 oxide. Now, as the reaction continues due to the presence of more oxygen in the atmosphere, nitrogen 4 oxide is then produced. Okay? Now, this nitrogen 4 oxide reacts with rain or the cloud which is in the atmosphere during water cycle. They reacts with the rain. The nitrogen 4 oxide reacts with the rain to form what we call nitric acid. Now, this nitric acid remains in the cloud. When the cloud is full of water, it then falls down as rain. Now, this rain is what we call acid rain. Now, it drops on the soil. This nitric acid drops on the soil, dissociates in the soil, and then forms what we call nitrates. Now, it is this nitrates that dissolves in water that plants absorb to make use of. Okay? So through thunderstorms and lightning, nitrogen can be fixed into the soil. Number 3 way nitrogen can be fixed also into the soil is called ammonification and nitrification. Now, what is actually ammonification? Ammonification can be defined as the process by which ammonium compounds are formed. Ammonium compounds are formed from dead and decaying living organisms. Okay, from dead and decaying living organisms and their waste products. That is ammonification. Based on this particular definition, we can channel or relate it with putrefaction. because putrefaction also has to do with decaying or breaking down of dead and decaying materials, and which is also another process through which nitrogen can be fixed or added to the soil, right? So ammonification has to do with the breaking down of dead remains of plants and animals and their waste into ammonium compounds. Now, once that is done, the process of nitrification sets in. Now, nitrification is actually the process by which ammonium compounds are first converted or broken down into nitrites. Please follow me. Into nitrites by nitrifying bacteria. First of all, they are broken down into nitrites by some bacteria. These bacteria, they are called nitrifying bacteria. An example of a nitrifying bacteria is Nitrosomonas. Nitrosomonas is a nitrifying bacteria that breaks down ammonium compound into nitrites. Now, also, as it is broken down into nitrites, plants can't make use of it. Plants can only make use of it when it is nitrate. So there are also some bacteria or another bacteria that converts these nitrites into nitrates. And these bacteria, they are called Nitrobacter. So the Nitrobacter converts nitrites into nitrates, while the Nitrosomonas or nitrifying bacteria converts ammonium compound into nitrites. So ammonification and nitrification are also processes by which reasonable amount of nitrogen is added to the soil. We also have other processes like the putrefaction. Okay, if we go back, we're going to see some of the processes. We have the putrefaction, which has to do with the decay of organic matter. We also have application of fertilizers. Now, there are several elements, key elements that are found in fertilizers. We have nitrogen, we have phosphorus, and then we have potassium. They are called NPK. They are most important elements, okay, or nutrients that are found in fertilizers. So the application of fertilizers, mostly artificial fertilizers, to the soil is also a process of applying, okay, a process of applying nitrogen or reasonable amount of nitrogen to the soil or fixing it to the soil. Another way also nitrogen can be added to the soil, reasonable amount of nitrogen can be added to the soil, is through the application of farmyard manure or organic fertilizers. Now, farmyard manure also, they contain high proportion of nitrogen. So as you are adding it to the soil, you are adding it, even animal dung, most times animal dung, they are also made up of high proportion of nitrogen. Green manure, poultry droppings, they have high proportion of nitrogen in them. So once you gather them and make a compost out of it and apply it to the soil, you are also applying reasonable amount of nitrogen to the soil. So it is also another process of adding nitrogen to the soil. We have nitrogen fixation, we have thunderstorm and lightning, we have ammonification and nitrification, we have putrefaction or decay of organic matter, we have applications of fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, as well as farmyard manure, organic fertilizers, poultry droppings, animal dungs, and so on. These are some of the processes through which nitrogen is added to the soil. Next, we're going to be looking at is processes through which nitrogen is removed from the soil. And I'm going to be explaining just one process. Now, we have two processes here on the screen. We have by a process we call nitrification, and then also we have by the action of leaching. Now, leaching has to do with the washing away of the soil, mostly the nutrient part of the soil being washed away Most times it's by water and so many other agents that can bring about leaching. Okay, so leaching has to do with washing away. So it's also another process through which nitrogen is being removed practically from the soil. But the one I really am interested in is by denitrification. Please note, denitrification is also another process. Now, what is actually denitrification? Now, denitrification is the process by which some microorganisms convert nitrates into nitrogen gas. Remember, during nitrification, we said that there are some bacteria that are responsible for converting ammonium compound into nitrites. And there are also some bacteria that can convert nitrites into nitrate. That's the nitrobacter. But there are also some bacteria that can convert nitrates back to nitrogen gas so that the nitrogen gas goes back to the atmosphere. This brings about nitrogen cycle. It brings about nitrogen cycle. Now, these bacteria, they are called denitrifying bacteria. Please take note, denitrifying bacteria, they convert nitrates into nitrogen gas, which then escapes back to the atmosphere. So this is the process through which nitrogen is removed from the soil. We have denitrification, and then by the action of leaching. All right, now next on the line for us to discuss is decomposition in nature. Now, when we introduced this particular topic, we made mention of decomposers. Now, what is decomposition? Decomposition is simply the actions or the process by which decomposers carry out their processes. Or you can say it is the activity of decomposers. All right? So, decomposers. What are decomposers? Decomposers are actually living organisms. They feed on dead remains of plants and animals, leading to the recycling of nutrients. That's what decomposers are. Living organisms that feed on plants and animals and break them down, feeds on them, and this process brings about the recycling of nutrients. Now, decomposers are also organisms that break down organic matter. I also explained that. Now, in order to produce suitable or soluble nutrients which are absorbed by plants. So, it simply means that the produce or the products of decomposition can be used by plants. Now, this simply implies that decomposers cause decay. Decomposers, they cause decay. Now, what are some of the examples of decomposers we have? We have the fungi, we have bacteria, we have termites, we have earthworms, and so many others. We have different types of decomposers. Now, if you have listened to these examples I gave of decomposers, you will find out that some of them can be visible to the eye and some of them cannot be visible to the eye. I can see earthworms. I can see termites, okay? These are decomposers I can see with my eyes, my naked eyes, without the use of any aid. But I can't see bacteria. There are some fungi you might not be able to see with your eyes. So most of these decomposers, based on this, decomposers can be divided into two main types or two main groups. So we have what we call macro decomposers and micro decomposers, or we have what we call micro decomposers. Micro simply means we can't see them unless with the aid of something. Micro decomposers and macro decomposers. Micro in the sense that's very small, and then macro, some small, but they are visible. All right. Now, what are micro decomposers? Micro decomposers. Now, micro decomposers are actually small or microscopic organisms that can cause decomposition or decay. Small. you can only see them with the aid of a microscope. You can't use your naked eyes to see them except with the aid of an instrument, which is the microscope. Now, examples include most bacteria and some fungi. Not all fungi is a micro decomposer. An example is mushroom. Mushroom is a fungi, but it is not a micro decomposer. We also have bacteria. Most of the bacteria, in fact, almost all bacteria, bacteria is a microorganism. It cannot be visible to the naked eyes. So these are what we call micro decomposers. The second type of decomposers is the macro decomposers. Now, macro decomposers are larger organisms that can cause what? Decay or decomposition. Examples of macro decomposers include the earthworms, we have termites, we have snails, we have mushroom, we have toadstool. So these are some of the examples of macro decomposers. Now, what is the processes involved during decomposition? Processes involved during decomposition. Now, I told you that during decomposition, two things happen, or let me say three things happen. First of all, dead remains of plants and animals are broken down. Number two, they are broken down into soluble product or products that are being used up by the decomposers as food, and also they are released to the soil, and the plants also make use of some of these things as nutrients. Now, the process of decomposition is as follows. Now, the first thing to note is that when a decomposer comes in contact with an organic matter, which has to do with a dead remains of plants and animals, first of all, it secretes enzymes on it. Now, these enzymes break down the organic matter into what we call simple soluble inorganic compounds. It breaks it down into simple soluble inorganic compounds. Now, after it has done that, the decomposers begin to absorb only small amount of these nutrients and energy for use. They use it. I told you they make use of it as food in order to also produce or generate energy for themselves. And then the rest of it is released to the soil. It is also released to air and also released to water. Okay, so this is the major process of what? Decomposition. Secretion of enzymes that breaks down organic matter into simple soluble inorganic compounds, and then the decomposers absorb a small amount as nutrients for themselves, and then the remaining or the rest of it is being released to the soil, to the air, and also to the water. Now, the products that are being released to the air, water, and so on, what are they used for? What are some of these products? Now, these products, most of them are gases. The ones released to the air, they are usually gases. Now, the gases include, during decomposition, gases that are being released, if you could remember, when we're talking about decay in terms of carbon cycle and oxygen cycle. We said during decay, carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere. So during some of the products that are being released during decomposition, gases is one of them. And these gases include carbon dioxide. We also have ammonia. We have hydrogen sulfide, and then we have water vapor. These are some of the products that are being released in the form of gases to the atmosphere. Another product that is being released to released during decomposition is energy, and this energy is in the form of heat energy. Also, nutrients are released to the soil. Nutrients are released to the soil. Now, these nutrients include nitrates, we have sulfates, and then we have phosphate ions. These are nutrients that are being released to the soil. Remember when we're talking about nitrogen cycle, we said that putrefaction brings about the addition of reasonable amount of nitrogen in the form of nitrates to the soil. So nutrients that are being released include nitrates, sulfates, and then phosphates, ion. These are some of the products that are being released during decomposition. Now, what are the roles of decomposers in the ecosystem? Remember when we started this particular topic, that was the question asked. Now, number one on the list to answer that particular question is that decomposers, by their actions, they enrich the soil with nutrients that are required by plants. If you could just recall, we mentioned something very important. We said that some of the products that are being released to the soil, that are being released during decomposition are released to the soil as nutrients, which we talked about: nitrates, sulfates, and then phosphates. These compounds enrich the soil. In fact, plants need them so much. They are required in large quantities for plant growth and also for healthy development. Now, number two roles of decomposers in an ecosystem is that they contribute to environmental pollution. Of course, they result to environmental pollution. One of the byproducts or one of the gases produced during decomposition is what? Carbon dioxide. And I told you the addition of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere has significant effect. In fact, it brings about the greenhouse effect, and that is environmental pollution. Okay, one of the effects of air pollution. And of course, another thing again, the smell. The smell is so offensive. So that is also air pollution. Another important use, which is probably an advantage of decomposer, is that they are useful in the making of cheese as well as yogurts. They are important in the use of making of cheese and yogurts. And then finally, they enable recycling of nutrients, thereby allowing the ecosystem to function. They bring about recycling. We've just talked about nitrogen cycle. They bring about recycling. We've also talked about carbon cycle. We've talked about oxygen cycle, the process of decay, adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and all that. These are some of the processes. These are some of the roles, the importance of decomposers in the ecosystem. So this is where we call it a wrap-up on this particular topic on nutrient cycling 2, talking about nitrogen cycle as well as decomposition. Now, but before we go, let's take a look at a few questions using the ExamGuide app. Very few questions, probably 2 or 3. Look at this question. It has to do with nitrogen cycle. They said legumes incorporate nitrogen gas into their proteins by legumes incorporate nitrogen gas into their proteins by A, says of the presence of azotobacter in their roots. No, azotobacters are not found in their roots, in leguminous plants' roots. No, they are found in the soil. C says they have well-developed root system. Their root system, no matter how developed it is, does not have the capacity or ability to trap or incorporate nitrogen gas into the plant body. And option D says they are autotrophic. That has nothing to do with it. The correct answer is option B, which says that they possess root nodules containing Rhizobium leguminosarium, which is a nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Okay, a nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Let's look at question 2. Now look at question 2. Which of the following is a nitrogen-fixing blue-green algae of the soil? Now the first one says Nitrosomonas. Now Nitrosomonas is not a nitrogen-fixing bacteria. It's a nitrogen-fixing bacteria per se through the process of nitrification. Clostridium is a nitrogen-fixing bacteria through the process of a non-symbiotic nitrogen fixation. And then we have Rhizobium, which is a symbiotic nitrogen fixer or fixation bacteria. Now, if you check A, B, and D, they are all bacteria. But the question there says, which of the following is a nitrogen-fixing green algae? Green algae. So the only option that explains or that says is a green algae is Anabena. So Anabena is a green algae. And then finally, the third and last question for today. Okay, look at this. The stunted growth of leguminous plant suffering from nitrogen deficiency may be corrected by inoculating the soil with A, is it denitrifying bacteria? B, is it saprophytic bacteria? C, is it rhizobium? D, is it nitrosomonas? Now, the correct answer is rhizobium. Why? Rhizobium will, when it gets into the soil, there will be a symbiotic relationship between the leguminous plant and the rhizobium. Now, the correct answer is not A. Denitrifying bacteria converts nitrates to nitrogen gas, which goes back to the atmosphere. Now, that one is also encouraging nitrogen deficiency. Another one, saprophytic bacteria, they bring about decay, breaking down of this thing. So this one has nothing, the question has nothing to do with decomposition. And then nitrosomonas, they convert ammonium compounds into nitrites. Plants don't make use of nitrites, okay? It must be converted into nitrates for plants to make use of. So what will really help a plant that is actually nitrogen deficient is by inoculating the soil with a rhizobium. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.